And if I told you one man crushed empires and built wonders but lost his mind to God, I'm Ramá. This is Nebuchadnezzar II.
We're talking about Nebuchadnezzar II. And what makes him so uniquely interesting is that we actually have to look at his life through two distinct yet deeply intertwined lenses. On one hand, you've got the hard physical archaeological record, right? We're talking cuneiform tablets and ruined cities. But then on the other hand, you have the dramatic, incredibly personal biblical narrative that we find in the book of Daniel. So we're going to explore how these two very different perspectives combine to tell the story of a man who literally reshaped the world. Let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start off with the warrior prince, then move into the fall of Jerusalem, followed by the architect of Babylon, his descent into madness, and finally, we'll tackle the big question, did the king convert?
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the warrior prince.
So before he was the king of this massive empire, Nebuchadnezzar was a fiercely aggressive military commander fighting for his father, who actually founded the Neo-Babylonian Empire. In early 605 BC, he leads his forces against the Egyptian superpower at the Battle of Carchemish. And listen, this wasn't just some minor skirmish. This was a colossal clash for the throat of the world, those vital trade routes connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. With some brilliant strategy, he absolutely crushes the Egyptians. But then, right at the peak of his victory in August, he gets urgent news.
After his father's death, Nebuchadnezzar sprinted 800 kilometers across the desert in just 23 days to seize Babylon's throne.
Now, a vacant throne in Babylon is basically a giant magnet for usurpers. So what does he do? He makes this frantic 800-kilometer dash across the scorching desert with only a tiny elite escort. It's an almost impossible journey, but he pulls it off in just 23 days to secure his crown.
And you have to understand, his military doctrine was just pure, unadulterated ruthlessness. We have the Babylonian Chronicles, specifically a clay tablet known as ABC5, and it brilliantly, or maybe terrifyingly, illustrates this uncompromising brutality. The cuneiform text actually states that when the surviving Egyptian soldiers tried to flee the battlefield at Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar relentlessly hunted them down. The record proudly boasts that literally no man escaped to tell the tale back in Egypt.
Which brings us to Section 2. The fall of Jerusalem. That ruthless efficiency very quickly turned toward a much smaller, rebellious kingdom that was caught right in the crossfire between Babylon and Egypt, the kingdom of Judah. Now, this is where the historical and the biblical records collide with just devastating clarity. Whenever the biblical narrative talks about his conquests in this region, we actually often have the archaeological receipt to back it up. Take tablet BM 21946 in the British Museum, for example. It is essentially the official administrative receipt documenting the exact date, the 2nd of Adar, 597 BC, that the young Judean king Jehoiakim realized, no Egyptian rescue is coming, and he surrendered Jerusalem.
Nebuchadnezzar's whole strategy for handling rebellion was just brutal calculation. Step 1 was what you could call intellectual decapitation. He didn't just conquer the city, he scooped up and deported the elite. The blacksmiths, the soldiers, and brilliant young minds like the biblical prophets Daniel and Ezekiel. He intentionally left behind a fractured, weakened population that he figured couldn't possibly organize a revolt. Step 2, he installs a puppet king named Zedekiah just to make sure those heavy taxes keep flowing back to Babylon. But when Zedekiah foolishly decides to trust in an Egyptian alliance and rebels, well, Nebuchadnezzar comes back. And this time, there is absolutely zero mercy. In 587 BC, the Babylonian war machine breaches the walls, completely burns Solomon's temple to the ground, blinds Zedekiah, but only after forcing him to watch his own sons die, and literally reduces the entire city of Jerusalem to smoldering ashes.
Moving on to Section 3, the architect of Babylon. So as you can imagine, maintaining an unstoppable army to crush all those rebellions was incredibly expensive. And Nebuchadnezzar needed immense wealth, not just to fund his military, but for his real overriding obsession, building stuff. To get that cash, he spent an agonizing 13 years besieging the wealthy island fortress of Tyre. It was a logistical nightmare of truly epic proportions. In fact, the biblical prophet Ezekiel vividly describes how the Babylonian soldiers carried so much heavy rubble to build a causeway out to the island that their heads literally grew bald and their shoulders rubbed raw. And the absolute worst part for the king? After 13 years of grueling labor, Tyre's elite just used their navy to silently evacuate all their gold. So Nebuchadnezzar basically captured an empty rock. This was such a severe financial disaster that it forced him to launch a subsequent raid into Egypt just to pay off his totally exhausted, disgruntled troops.
But the vast wealth that he did manage to amass from the rest of his empire, he poured directly into his capital.
He built the Ishtar Gate, Hanging Gardens, and Tower of Babel. Babylon became the center of the world.
He completely transformed Babylon into the most dazzling, impenetrable city of the ancient world. I mean, we're talking about the legendary Hanging Gardens, this lush engineering marvel of elevated terraces, reportedly built just to cure his wife Amytis' homesickness for her native mountains. He constructed the brilliant, towering blue Ishtar Gate, covered in these golden dragons and lions. He restored the colossal Etemenanki ziggurat, which is heavily associated with the Tower of Babel, and he surrounded the entire metropolis with defenses so thick that four-horse chariots could safely race along the top of the walls. He had created an absolute masterpiece, but this sheer architectural obsession was rapidly feeding a growing megalomania.
This takes us right into Section 4, the descent into madness. This is probably the most startling chapter of his life. The book of Daniel actually frames his immense architectural success as the direct catalyst for a terrifying psychological breakdown into supreme arrogance. And the number 7 echoes ominously throughout this whole descent. Intoxicated by his absolute power, he erects this colossal golden statue and demands universal, unwavering worship from his subjects. When 3 Hebrew youths, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse to bow down, he is so furious he orders an execution furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than normal. Though they miraculously survive the flames, his pride just keeps swelling unchecked, and it ultimately leads to a divine decree of 7 years of total debilitating insanity.
The final warning for the king came in a deeply unsettling dream. He dreams of this massive, glorious tree that shelters the entire world, but suddenly it's violently ordered to be cut down by a heavenly watcher. The prophet Daniel reluctantly delivers the interpretation: Nebuchadnezzar is the tree. Because of his unchecked pride, his vast kingdom is going to be stripped away, and he will be driven out of human society to live among the wild beasts. All of this until he truly recognizes that heaven, not his own hand, rules the world. And sure enough, just a year later, while he's strolling on his palace roof, arrogantly boasting about the great Babylon he had built, his mind completely snaps.
The descriptions of what happens next are genuinely chilling. The most powerful man on earth is driven away from his throne. He's out there eating grass like an ox.
God humbled the mightiest king. For 7 years he ate grass like an ox, then acknowledged the Most High.
His hair growing out like coarse eagle's feathers, and his nails hardening like bird's claws. Now, while the biblical text explicitly describes this as a sudden stroke of divine judgment, modern medical scholars often look at his symptoms through the fascinating lens of a remarkably rare psychological condition called clinical lycanthropy, or zoanthropy. The working theory here is that the sheer, crushing weight of his megalomania and absolute power basically triggered a severe psychotic break, and it caused the great architect of the ancient world to spend 7 years crawling on all fours in the dirt of his own magnificent palace gardens.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5. Did the king convert?
According to Daniel, his sanity was fully restored when he finally humbled himself and looked up to heaven. But it begs the question, what did this king actually believe at the end of his life? When we try to answer this historical mystery, we really have to neutrally balance the 2 surviving records. The book of Daniel gives us a deeply personal testimony. In fact, it's often considered the only part of the Bible authored by a pagan king, where Nebuchadnezzar explicitly praises the Most High and acknowledges the total sovereignty of the God of Israel. However, when we flip over to the surviving Babylonian clay tablets and architectural inscriptions from the twilight of his life, there is absolutely zero mention of a monotheistic conversion. In the hard historical record, he remains a devout, unwavering polytheist, faithfully restoring pagan temples and giving total glory to the Babylonian patron god Marduk, right up until his dying breath.
But what is entirely undisputed is his astonishing longevity and success as a ruler. He reigned over the Neo-Babylonian Empire for an incredible 43 years, finally passing away in 562 BC. And he leaves behind this legacy that is just so incredibly difficult to neatly categorize. He was simultaneously a visionary builder and a ruthless destroyer. He was an unhinged madman, but also a brilliant tactician. This profound duality really cements his place as one of the most deeply complex figures in all of human history.
So I want to leave you with this final kind of wild thought. Nebuchadnezzar burned the temple in Jerusalem to the ground, fully believing he was erasing a rebellious, insignificant nation from the map forever. But the irony of history here is just profound. By forcing the Judeans into a harsh exile without a physical temple, he inadvertently forced them to center their faith entirely on their written scriptures. He effectively catalyzed the birth of the synagogue system. In his ruthless attempt to destroy them, he actually ended up forging an unbreakable religious identity that has outlasted his supposedly eternal city of Babylon by thousands of years. So what do you think? Was he truly the master author of his own glorious history, or was he just an unwitting instrument in a much, much larger story? Let me know your thoughts on that.